Hello and welcome to episode 18 of my Learning Photography series. Today we're going to talk about program mode. Program mode is a nice alternative to using full auto. In full auto, the camera does everything. You have no control over anything. And you have to accept what the camera, the settings that the camera chooses. In program mode though, it's like full auto, but you can override certain things. And you can also control the ISO. So that is useful, and one of the reasons I typically will recommend that people use program mode over auto, for example, is if they're, say, sightseeing and they're in a church, an old church, or in a museum, or any place else where flash isn't allowed. The problem with auto is that if the camera determines it doesn't have enough light, it'll just pop up the flash, if your camera has one of those pop-up flashes. In program mode, that won't happen. You have to push a button to make the flash come up if you want to use it. So that's handy. The other reason that program mode is useful is that it's for that. I tell people it's for that situation where you just want to make sure you get the shot. And again, I advise not using auto, although auto probably in that situation is equally good. But you do have control over ISO, and you can also set the ISO to auto. But if it's a once-in-a-lifetime shot, I remember one time we were in Washington, D.C., and the president just happened, I think it was President Clinton at the time, was coming out of the Blair House, and we had some friends with us that we were showing around the city, and I pulled my camera up and took a shot and didn't get it. Had I put it in program mode, it would have been fine. So that's the kind of situation where program mode can really be useful. So the way program mode works, and I'm going to put my camera in program mode, and I guess I need to turn it on too. Put it in program mode, and what happens is the camera's meter, just like in auto mode, is determining what light there is. So if you set your camera to program mode, and especially since we've been working with exposure compensation, make sure that the 00 is showing in the exposure compensation value, and not something that we had from a previous, or you had from a previous shooting. And so if I want to take a picture of that tree back there, and I frame the shot, the camera's telling me it's going to use 1/250th of a second and an aperture of 5.6. So I can just accept that and take the shot. Now, as I look at the image, it looks pretty nice. It's kind of dark in areas that I'd like it to be dark, so I'm happy with that. But maybe if I want that tree to come out a little bit more, to be a little bit more, less in shadow, just like the person in front of the bright window, I need to use exposure compensation. So I'm going to take that same, frame up that same shot. I'm going to increase my exposure compensation by 2/3 of a stop. So it says 0.7. I take the shot, and as I look at it and compare it to the one before, the tree is a little bit less dark. So I'm happy with that. So that's one way you can override the program settings, or the settings that the program mode has chosen. So that the other thing is, I need to go back now and make sure that I set my exposure compensation back to 00. So if I want to take a shot up there at a piece of wood coming out of the roof, and I want it to be a shallow depth of field, then I know that I want my aperture to be the smallest value possible, as close to whatever this lens will support. And this particular lens will support 2.8, and there may be too much light for that. So what I can do is I can move my front dial, the dial I normally would use to change shutter speed if I was in shutter priority, or aperture if I was in aperture priority. I can move that dial until the both numbers are going to change, because the camera is always trying to balance it out to get a correct exposure. That is to say, the correct amount of the quantity of light in the scene. But I can change it until the shutter speed, or the aperture, is as low as I can get it. It's 2.8, and it's telling me it's going to use 1/4000th of a second, which on some cameras is the fastest shutter speed there is. This camera has a shutter speed of 1/8000. But 1/4000, and I'm going to take the shot, and as I look at it, because of the distance and so on, the background isn't really way out of focus, but as we look at it, we can see it's a bit blurry, and the piece of wood is in sharp focus. It's a little bright, so then let me just compensate there with exposure compensation and underexpose it a bit. So in doing that, let's see, I lost my, okay, I'm at 2.8. I'm going to underexpose by 3/4 of a stop. Take the shot. Now it's chosen the shutter speed of 1/6400 and f2.8. And I take the shot, and my background is still a little fuzzy, and the piece of wood is a little bit less bright. So that's the way you can do it. What you do is you're moving that one dial, the front dial. In this case, it's a front dial. And both numbers are going to change. So you choose either shutter speed or aperture, whichever it is that you want to affect, and get that number where you want it, and the camera will just adjust the shutter speed, the alternative, the shutter speed or the aperture, to the number that would generate a correct exposure. And then you can step in with exposure compensation to adjust that to be a little bit underexposed or a little bit overexposed, depending on the situation. So I suggest you practice using program mode a little bit. Go around in different situations, shady areas, bright areas, and adjust for what you want the outcome to be, just as we've done in previous exercises and will continue to do when we're working in manual. So when should you use program mode? Well, I've kind of said that if you're tempted to use auto, use program. What I will typically do, if I'm out and doing some street shooting, I just want to capture some kind of spontaneous shots in downtown area of a city, I'll put my camera in program mode and I'll put my ISO at auto, and I can just really pick up my camera and shoot, and I can adjust with exposure compensation and may not even worry about shutter speed and aperture for depth of field and blurring images and so on. So that's one place where I use program mode. On the other hand, if I have time to set up a shot, even that same scenario where I'm downtown and kind of taking street portraits, candids of people, whether they see me or don't see me taking the pictures, and I have some time to think about what I'm doing, then I'll oftentimes use shutter priority mode, because I want to make sure I don't get a blurry picture. And I'm not so concerned about depth of field, perhaps. If I am, then I'll use aperture priority. If I have a lot of time to really, if I'm standing on a corner and just kind of watching what happens, I might use manual, because then I have that full control. So the advantage of looking at these other modes, shutter priority, aperture priority, and program mode, is that you realize what options you have when you want to be a little freer and not have to think about all the dials and buttons. On the other hand, when you do have time to be considering what you want your outcome to be, then I do recommend you use manual mode, because you have full control. And remember, we always want to stay in control of our camera. Thank you very much for checking in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.